Welcome to the final lecture of our class, English 3073, Women's Studies 3073. In this particular class, we have the big, daunting challenge of covering what I think is one of the most important novels of the 20th century, written by an American, The Bluest by Toni Morrison. There's no way we're going to be able to do it justice in just this short format. Normally, I would take a lot more time, but we just don't have the ability to do that given our resources. So I'm going to hit some of the highlights and ask you to do some thinking about certain questions that I'm going to raise. And hopefully they will prompt you to think deeper about some of the things that you noticed, maybe some of the things that you didn't notice. The first thing I always like to begin with is to ask students to really take a close look at the author's foreword or some sort of an introduction or preface. Authors frequently will include that before the beginning of a novel. And people just skip right over it, and you really shouldn't, because this one contains a very frank and very sincere discussion of why she wrote the book and what she was trying to achieve with it, and even a little bit of a self-critique. She said, I was trying something new narratively, and you can see that as you see the different voices shift back and forth. And she said, ultimately, I'm not sure I was all that successful with it. I think she was. I think it was really interesting. But she was a little bit self-critical in here and saying, I'm not sure that my narrative experimentation here worked that well. You be the judge. But one of the things that she raises here is really about the central theme of the novel. So she gives it straight to you. She says, she talks about the damaging internalization of assumptions of immutable inferiority originating in an outside gaze. Now, that's a big mouthful, I know. But these are really what she's trying to get at here is what's it like to be a member of a particular group of people whose existence is defined by other people in a very negative way. She said, I focused, therefore, on how something as grotesque as the demonization of an entire race could take root inside the most delicate member of society, a child. In other words, what does it do to children? What does it do to anybody, right? It could be Charlie, it could be Piccola, it could be anybody. To grow up in a world that says you're not worthy, you're not as good, and you can't figure out why that is. Why is that? Is it something in me? Is it something about me? Is it something I've done? It's clearly not something I've done. And so the central symbol here is blue eyes, something that, most African American people don't have. I mean, some do, but most don't. And it becomes this symbol of the dominant culture. Okay. The Dick and Jane books, most of you are way too young, but I remember growing up in the 60s in elementary school, and we read Dick and Jane books, probably right about the end of that. And Dick and Jane books are early readers. You can see the character in the stage performance there holding a Dick and Jane book, and they helped you with sentence structures and vocabularies. See Dick run, see Jane run, run Dick run. They had a dog named Spot and a cat named Fluff or something like that, I guess. But what's unique about the books is that although they did a good job of teaching kids how to read, they did, it was just like the whitest white neighborhood in all of whiteness. Every person in the book was white. And so I think Morrison uses that vehicle, and even at the beginning of each chapter, sort of this mimicry of the see Dick run, see Jane run, the Dick and Jane book, syntax that they're trying to teach kids, to continually echo the dominant culture saying, well, white is good, everything else is different and bad, and all standards of beauty or success are white standards. And what she's saying is, what does that do to a person psychologically who is not that? And so you see the themes throughout the book. Now, I'll make references to these as we go, but in the interest of time, can't walk through each chapter. Alienation, right? I'm not that. I can't be that. I'll never be that, right? I'm not gonna be that. There's no way I can look that way, be that way, pass for that sort of person. And so I am permanently sort of exiled to a position of inferiority and alienation. The question of freedom. Obviously, if you are African American or if you know anything about African American history, the theme of freedom in the history of that culture and in those people is exceedingly important. Morrison, though, presents you with a character, Charlie Breedlove, who has freedom, but boy, it's a dangerous freedom, isn't it? And we'll get to that in just a moment, but it's it's, freedom in what sense? Freedom can be a really dangerous thing too when it means there are no constraints on a person's behavior. Racial constructs and self-loathing. This is the interesting thing I think that the novel presents us with through all the different characters, whether it's Pecola wanting blue eyes, whether it's Pauline who envies and fantasizes about being part of a white family, even to the detriment of her own. She mistreats her own child and is embarrassed by her own child because that isn't this perfect image of sort of the family that she works for, which is a white family, or the perfect image of the white families and the white people that she sees in the movies every day. And so she, having suffered an injury to her foot as a child and having a limp, I guess it is, and then over time neglecting her own self-care, and then being basically beaten by Charlie at all these different occasions, lets herself go physically. She doesn't even care what she looks like, having lost teeth without doing anything to look nice, just letting herself go because she doesn't care about reality anymore and what she really looks like. She only cares about fantasy. So what the novel at its heart is asking is, what does it do to a person to be self-loathing, right? To hate yourself because the outside world tells you that you're not worthy. How does that corrode you? How does that work like an acid on your soul? And it works on different people in the novel, different ways, right? Look at all the different characters who all are African American, who experience and thus react differently from one another given the same set of circumstances. So we've got Geraldine. Do you remember her? She's the one whose cat gets killed. Her own rotten, bratty boy does it and blames it on Pecola. She absolutely despises Pecola. Why? Why? Because she hates what Pecola looks like and is, right? So self-loathing. I hate what people think of me. I hate what people think of my people. I hate being embarrassed by this and this and this. Oprah Winfrey was a big fan of Toni Morrison and knew Toni Morrison very well. And I remember hearing her in an interview with Toni Morrison bring up this idea of self-loathing and inferiority complex kind of thing. And she said, even after I was a millionaire, I would go to Target or someplace like that, and I'd pull out my credit card, and they would swipe my credit card or whatever. And she said, I always had this brief split-second flash and said to myself, oh, please let it go through. Now, Oprah's like a billionaire now, right? I mean, come on, the ladies, if you saw Oprah in your checkout line and the card got rejected, the first thing you think of is, oh, don't worry, she's got it, okay? But she said, I always felt like, oh, I would hate to see, and she said, I don't want the white people to see my card get declined, even if it was by mistake. And she said, and she's talking about the bluest eye, and she's talking to Toni Morrison about this, is I have felt that, and I feel it still. What will they think of me? They'll think I'm like all their stereotypes, that I'm fulfilling all of their prejudices. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And so Geraldine, like so many she spends a whole chapter talking about good Christian middle-class African-American women, right? The ones who are kind of like asexual and they keep their house tidy. And their husbands are almost like pets. They do what they're told, right? They're good church-going girls. They don't do certain things. They keep their house clean. They keep their clothes ironed. They go to church and they what are they craving? They're craving respectability. Right? I want that respectability. I need that respectability. I don't want white people to look at me and say, look at this person. See, I told you African-American folks are this way or that way. Not me, not me. You're not going to be able to stereotype me, right? Which is a natural reaction, right? But it stems from what? Both racial constructs and self-loathing, or at least loathing of your own type of people. The impact of time and place on our lives is another important theme because, of course, Claudia's looking back at this and recollecting this, one assumes from adulthood, with the perspective of adulthood. And And that's an important thing too. She's trying to make sense of the past. Now let's take a look at the Breedloves here in particular, because this is, of course, the nucleus of it. We have Charlie in his childhood. He's bounced around and really kind of abandoned. He's raised by his Aunt Jimmy. And by all accounts, she's this wonderful, loving person, but sadly, she dies. And part of the quiz will be, how did she die, right? So you gotta tell me how she dies. And it's kind of a silly thing. People ascribed her death to something really stupid and silly, but people believed it, right? Anyway, the big moment in his life is when he is, I'm gonna put it nicely, romantically engaged or involved with a young lady in the woods, okay? And two white men come along with lanterns and shine on him and insist that he continue with the sexual act that he's engaged in. And, of course, this is degrading and humiliating. They think it's funny. The girl he's with is terrified and horribly ashamed and embarrassed. But Charlie is, but all those things, but he's also angry. And he takes it out on the girl. He does. Why would he do that? She hadn't done anything. It was because he felt that he was powerless against the white men, and so he needed to act that rage out on someone else. And so you see this displaced aggression where his reaction to that situation was to lash out, not at the people who had harmed him, because he felt like he couldn't do that. That would be a death sentence. But against the girl who, in his eyes, in his mind, had incited the passion and arousal for her, and therefore she was responsible somehow, right? Do you see? I mean, I'm not asking you to understand and sympathize with that. I'm asking you to understand in the sense of, do you see why he thought that way? Not that it was acceptable, but we can follow the breadcrumbs and say, yep, I saw how he got there. He should not have, but he did get that way. Then when he's seeking his father and his father rejects him, basically he just sits there in a catatonic state and soils himself and stays there for the longest. He is having a complete mental breakdown when that happens. And finally, the most disturbing scene, obviously, of the entire novel, one that is really, I mean, most people get very upset when they read this, of course, and can't understand it. And it's very difficult for us to understand because we're not like that. Why would he do what he did to Piccola? I would urge you to go back to those passages and take a long, hard look at them, because it explains very carefully why he did it. There's no mystery why he did it. She doesn't leave you hanging on that. She tells you why he did it. He did it because he felt both sorrow for her and disgust. Disgust that she wasn't what he thought she should be. That she wasn't this beautiful, brilliant, smart, clever, sparkling personality. That she was rather slow. She was unattractive by their standards of the day. And he was humiliated again that he could not do anything to change that. I can't improve my child's life. And so he acts out against her. Now, a lot of people say, well, why sexually? Well, you'll have to ask Dr. Phil and a whole bunch of people that have PhDs in psychology about that. But I will tell you this, that it has long been held as a truism that rape is not an act of sexual passion. It's an act of violence. It's an act of dominance. It's an act of showing somebody that you're in control of them. And Charlie is a man who never feels like he's in control of anything. He experiences a level of freedom, if you want to use it that way, that is really just anarchy and lawlessness. That he's killed people before, white people, right? And he's done what he wanted, and he drank, and he did whatever he felt like, and when he's finished with the situation in his own home, burns his house down, right? I mean, this is a guy who says, I don't control anything in my life, so I'm just going to lash out. And I'm going to lash out and exert my dominance and control wherever I can, particularly towards people and situations where that constantly remind me of my sense of failure. And it's a mental break that he experiences, not an excuse for what he does, because he's horrible to Piccola as well. It's like with the sofa situation, right? Lump it, pal. Too bad. You got to make payments on this sofa, whether it's got a rip in it or not. We don't care. And he feels, I can't do anything. I'm powerless. He doesn't feel like a man, right? I'm not respected. I don't have rights. I don't have the ability to take someone to court and say, you did me wrong and I have the same rights you do. He knows he doesn't live in that kind of society. And so what do you do with that knowledge? Do you just simply suck it up? Do you just simply, or is what Morrison telling us that sooner or later when you subject people to that, they're going to lash out? It's just, they reach a breaking point and they destroy others and they destroy themselves. Just as Pauline, who adopts the nickname Polly. And it's such a sad line in a passage in the novel where Morrison tells, where Claudia tells us that she never had a nickname because in order to have a nickname, people would have to notice something about you, right? That's sad, that you never have a nickname unless somebody actually gets to know you well enough to give you one, and nobody bothered to get to know her. The only thing that they knew about her was her bad foot and her limp. And the escapism that she's engaged in, the fact that she's only staying with Charlie because it gives her a feeling of self-righteousness, that, the worst thing that could happen to Pauline is if Charlie came home one day and said, I'm giving up drinking, I've been a terrible husband and father, that's all going to change, I'm going to be the best person I can be, and I even want to go to church with you, honey. Oh, that would ruin her life. Why? Because she needs him to be this horrible figure, because she needs to feel self-righteous in experiencing her own persecution. It gives her a martyr syndrome. She becomes the martyr. And so she doesn't at all want him to reform. She loves the fact that she says, give it to him, Jesus, when he backs up into the stove and burns his rear end, right? She loves getting into fights with him because it makes her feel like, so she lashes out. So she's sort of alternating between this fantasy world she lives in every day, working for the white family that she works for, and this nightmarish existence back home. Every time she comes through her own front door and looks at where she lives and who she lives with, she is disgusted. She's disgusted by who she is and what life she lives, and her way of dealing with it is to escape. Charlie's way of dealing with it is another way. Piccola's way of dealing with it, of course, is to fantasize about having blue eyes, because that's the thing that makes her feel that would make me different. That's what I need that I don't have, that would make me accepted, that would make me be pretty, that would make me make people like me, that would make me popular, that people would associate with me, and I would be a success in life. If I just had blue eyes, I'd be fine. Of course, Claudia despises things with blue eyes, especially the baby dolls she gets for Christmas. And she takes them apart because she takes them apart because she wants to know what's in this thing that make it so pretty in other people's eyes. What's the stuff in here that makes other people like this thing? I don't like it. I don't like it at all. It's just something that doesn't look like me. So she takes the dolls apart, guts them basically, to find out what's in there that's some sort of magic secret sauce of some sort that make people look at her and say pretty, and look at Claudia and say not pretty, right? What makes Shirley Temple so wonderful and not me, right? What is it? Claudia doesn't like it. Piccola wants to be it, right? Whatever that it is. And Claudia lashes out against little white girls. So her way of dealing with it is to rebel against it, to fight against it, to do something else. So each of these characters has some sense there of both the injustice, yes, a sense of self-loathing or inferiority, and then each of them also has their own individual response to it. Well, we'll continue with the next part of the lecture here and dive into some of the other aspects of the text as well.